We're continuing our conversation with World War II veterans, and I'm Kyle Swicegood, and on behalf of Don Wooten and myself, we're representing the Rotary Club of Mocksville, and I'm real happy right now to introduce someone who I've known all my life, and that is Frank Couch, and the military would probably know you as Walter Couch. Is that right? Frank happens to live in the Jericho community. Frank, in 1940, before the war began, what were you doing?
Working at Coolman.
Speak up just a little bit.
Working at Coolman.
What were you doing at the Coolamy Mill?
I was probably, well, I run about every job they had done. I don't remember what I was doing at that time.
When the war began, and you were called, did you get a letter from Uncle Sam?
Yes.
And what did the letter say?
You have been selected.
Did a
they say that, but they're gonna take you anyhow.
yeah? Did a sinking feeling happen in your stomach when that happened?
No,
Were you ready to go?
I was ready whether I was ready or not.
Right. So where did you go to basic?
Fort Bragg. I was sworn in down there and went to Pickett, Virginia.
And then from Pickett, Virginia, where did you go? And you need to speak up just a little bit, Frank. I'm gonna bring that mic a little closer to you. Speak up. Where did you go after Pickett, Virginia?
I went to Florida, Camp Blanding.
Mm-hmm. What kind of training did you have? You were in the Army.
Yeah.
What kind of training did you have?
Combat training.
Mm-hmm.
That
What?
meant long marches and a lot of drills of different kind.
Mm-hmm.
And we did force marching and just regular marching too.
Mm-hmm. What's force marching?
Get there and back.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You're running with your rifle up sometimes and that type of thing.
Yeah.
Good
Uh,
old rifle PT, right?
Yeah. We made one force march, whether we liked it or not. We went 5 miles and 2/10 in 57 minutes with everything we owned.
Now, there was one point that you left and went through Washington, D.C. on a train on the way to New York. Is that right?
I was on the way back.
I was on the way back. Okay,
I was
what?
out of service. I mean, getting ready to be discharged. The war was over.
Okay, well then let's go back to when you went to Europe.
Yeah.
Where were you ported out to go to Europe?
Boston, Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm. And I'm assuming that was on a big ship.
Actually it was a regular passenger ship. They turned it into a ship to carry troops.
Was that a fun trip across the Atlantic?
Well, if you call it seasickness, it was fun, all right.
That doesn't sound like a lot of fun. So where did you land? Was it in England or Ireland or Scotland?
England. Yeah, in England.
Mm-hmm. And did you go to a base in England?
Yes.
Do you remember what that base was?
Not offhand. They all went there though before they went overseas. I mean, France.
So what year and approximate month were you in England?
I don't think we were there more than a couple, 2 or 3 months. And all this stuff it's been a long time, you know.
I know it has.
And yeah, we did some training for marching and all that stuff. We didn't have no picnic and no times off and stuff like that. But we didn't know where we were going.
Mm-hmm.
Like everybody else, they didn't know where they were going.
Now, there was a day, who was your commanding officer? Or what general were you under? I guess is the question I'm trying to ask.
I don't remember.
You don't remember? There was a day that you found out that you were going to France. Do you remember that?
Well, we knew it, and then we waited around 2 or 3 days before we ever got off and got over there.
Mm-hmm. So what was your experience like when you landed in France?
We thought we was going to get wet, but we didn't.
Mm-hmm.
We climbed off the ship and down the rope ladder at the throwover side, and you've probably seen it.
Mm-hmm.
And we went in on the little, oh, great day, I can't think what the name of the boat was. It landing ships, I think it was going to go. No, that wasn't what it was. It was a troop ship, what it was used for. To carry about 25 or 30 people.
Mm-hmm.
But we didn't get wet. Just all the rest of them for us did.
Mm-hmm. Now, I understand that they had already cleaned up the beaches.
Yeah.
And so you were kind of coming there 3 days after the initial invasion. Is that right?
No, it was a little later than that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I forget now what day it was, but like you said, it was cleaned up. I was expecting to see dead people everywhere, and it was 2 days before I seen a dead one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Frank, that's a question I want to ask you. Earlier, we were talking to another veteran, and the comment was made that war is hell. What's it like for a country boy from Moxville to run up upon people that have been killed in action?
Well, the thing, it didn't bother me, but I just wondered what their mother would say.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only way. And it didn't hurt me none, nothing like that. It hurts now, but it didn't then.
Mm-hmm.
So we was mean enough to shoot your grandma, probably.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm sure war creates anger inside of you. How many days after you had been in France were you wounded, and how were you wounded? It's been a long time, hasn't it?
About like it was yesterday too.
Yeah.
I don't know. We went to Cherbourg, and we got caught up with the enemy. But we was taking care of prisoners before we ever seen any combat. But we didn't. We got over about 16 days after the invasion started. So they all way inland quite a bit by the time we got there.
You were in the hedgerows.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Now, were you shot at, or did you receive shrapnel wounds?
I think it was a mortar shell, because I was looking at the ground when it went off, and it just threw me backwards, and everything I had come off of me.
Mm-hmm. Did it knock the clothes? Did it knock the shirt off of you?
No, it got my rifle gone and gas mask, but there was a lot of them thought I was really banged up, because there was 25 pieces of shrapnel that I counted, and none of them was real big, but I didn't walk in it for probably a week after they brought me back to England.
Salisbury, England.
Salisbury.
Mm-hmm. When you were wounded, were you able to walk?
Yes, I walked probably a quarter of a mile back to the back of the lines to get a medic. Our medic gave me all the pills that I was supposed to get that he couldn't do anything with. And there was the tanks that caused me to get wounded. This outfit took care of me.
Did they?
Yeah.
Frank, what's it like? How many pieces of shrapnel did you say?
About 25.
What's it like for, and you were what, 19 years old?
I was 21, nearly 22.
Almost 22. What's it like for a 22-year-old country boy grew up in the Jericho community, worked at the Coolamy cotton mill. What's it like to be in a foreign country, bleeding with shrapnel in your body, so far away from home? Do you remember that feeling?
Not really. You was more scared than anything else,
Mm-hmm.
and all you could think of when was your time coming.
Mm-hmm.
But we were trained for all of this stuff, and we knew what we were getting into, actually. But it's a lot worse than you'd ever think it was.
Mm-hmm.
We wasn't trained for a lot of this stuff,
Mm-hmm.
especially hedgerows.
Yeah.
Because the enemy could hide there, or
Well,
not knowing how to handle an ambush and that type of thing, or what was it?
They raised a lot of apples around there, and I don't know why they built a mound around their own place and stuff like that, and it growed up with trees.
Right.
And there wasn't no way you can get through it. So they come up with the big idea that they used a tanks with a blade on it, and they would just shoot right through there and cut the place for it, and everybody run through there. But that's about the only way you can get through them.
Something I had thought to ask earlier, what kind of rifle or weapon were you using in combat?
M1.
An M1?
M1,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
8-shot.
Now, you and I have talked before, and the folks that are watching the video don't know that I grew up right down the street from you, and that I've asked you all kind of questions all of my life.
Every time you see me.
Down at my grandmother's country store. You were shipped over to Salisbury, England on a plane?
No,
On a boat.
on a boat.
And they patched you up, and you were there for how long?
I'd say about 2 weeks. I don't remember when I got well enough to walk. It didn't hurt me that long, but I was well enough to get away from it.
Mm-hmm. So I guess after that they gave you a vacation slip to go to the beach and have a little vacation or recreation, or did they send you right back to the front lines?
It wasn't no beach job, I'll tell you that. We had a beach, but it wasn't with a pail and a spoon.
Mm-hmm.
No, they sent me back.
Now, you told me a long time ago that they sent you back to France, and
Yeah.
okay, and when they sent you back, they dropped you off and told you to find your company.
Yes.
And Frank, I know it's an emotional topic, but I think it's important to get on video. Share with them about what you learned the day that you got back to the front lines about your friend from Albemarle.
Well, this fellow, we were real good buddies, and he was from Albemarle, like we said. And as quick as I seen one of the fellows that had been in as long as I had, about the first word to come out of his mouth, that Burris got killed yesterday, and that was his name. And it hurt. Hey, he was just like a brother, but you can't think about all this stuff and do your job too, but you think anyhow.
Frank, you received the Purple Heart.
Yeah.
And here's something interesting, Don, that you may or may not know about Frank. Frank, did you have any participation in the Korean War? Vietnam? Did you?
I was in the Air Force then.
He was in the Air Force, which you don't find that a lot. Someone that served World War II and happened to participate in the military during another wartime. But this video that we are creating, we're going to leave here in this library so that future generations will see and hear from our veterans during this time. I've told all of our veterans, you're not going to be here, Frank, probably in 20 years or so. And
there's doubt there, yeah.
I mean, I hope you are, but the chances are you're not going to be here in 20 years.
Yes.
If you wanted to say something to a future generation about what went on in World War II and what your feelings are towards this country, what would you want to tell them?
Well, if you have to go, Red, just do what you're told, and you'll be better off than you will being smart and think you know it all, because you don't.
Frank, did you find that most of the guys that were serving with you had positive attitudes about serving in the Army?
We were just like one big happy family. We talked about a lot of stuff, but when you got into it, it was serious. We wasn't fooling around.
Do you you told us earlier before we started filming how old you are? Do you mind telling the camera how old you are?
88.
88 years old.
2 8s.
By the way, I'll tell you, you look pretty good for an 88-year-old.
Agreed.
Yeah, that's a ditto.
And it's
There's all those.
It's amazing how active he is too, and you know that better than I.
Frank is the local handyman, and I'm going to say this. I mean, all the veterans that's come in here, I've got a ton of respect for. Frank is extra special. I never had a granddad on my dad's side because he passed away before I was born, and Frank is probably the closest thing to a grandparent on my dad's side that I've ever had, and I'm not ashamed to say it on film that I love you, and I think the world of you.
I know it.
Frank, is there, 60-some years after the war, is the war in your mind very much?
About every day.
That's been a resounding comment from the veterans, that it had such an impact on their life that there's not a day that doesn't go by that they don't think about it. Do you feel, Frank, that your life was enriched because of the experience?
Well, I did a lot of things I didn't know I could do, but I wouldn't want to do them again.
This is going to be a weird question.
Uh-oh.
But is there any, when I look back on my life, I think of particular specific times in my life, and I can really remember that day. Are there any specific days in your experience during World War II that just kind of pop out that you remember?
Well, it's something probably different every day, but I don't have no special. I like the idea of when I come home.
How did it feel to come home?
Mm.
Were you able to just jump back into life? I can't imagine that we're in battle one day, we're wounded one day, we're back in battle, and then boom, we are placed back into civilized society. What's that like to go from that one extreme to the other?
It's a good feeling, I'll tell you that. You know, nobody gonna shoot at you.
Was it hard to adjust, though? I mean, was there any anger that you had after the war?
No, they was in it just like we had.
Yeah. How long did it take you to come home by ship? How long did it take you to come home by ship after the war was over?
I know it took 7 days to get there because it took that long for a German to get a torpedo at you, and we went this way one day and that way, but we was going towards England.
So you
We changed courses every 7.
were right.
Yeah. But coming back, they I don't think it was more than 3 or 4 or 5 days, maybe.
Okay.
But they had to turn the ship sideways one morning about 4 o'clock, and come to find out somebody had appendicitis. They operated on him. He was going up and down this way instead of up and down like this. I woke up at that time, and
And then you found out what it was.
then I didn't know it till the next morning. I know it was awful calm. It wasn't going up and down, and that's what they told us the next day, that they operated on some guy.
Well, Frank, yes.
I can remember, I've talked with, back when I was working with a United Way agency some years ago, and I worked with several Vietnam vets, and one of the things that they said they thought was rough on them was because they were flying home, and they were might have been in combat one day, and the next home they were back in the States, and so they didn't have the adjustment time that 7 or 8 days might have given them if they could have come home by ship.
We was only coming back on Thanksgiving Day. I remember that.
And you were thankful.
Yes, and we had turkey too.
Is that right? Is that right? Well, Frank, we're going to wrap this video up, and I'm so glad that you participated in it, and I'm going to share something for the video audience that's watching this that it's happening right now. Frank has already been to the memorial with 2 of his close friends.
Yes.
And we had a really good day, the 3 of us, Jerry Swicegood, my dad, and myself, and Frank flew up and got to take a look at the memorial that did memorialize the sacrifice that Frank and his brothers and sisters in arms did in the 1940s. Frank lost his Purple Heart, and my dad saw to it that he got a replacement Purple Heart. And Frank, I think you're going to be possibly getting that pinned on you by a great American hero and politician. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And who is that? Bob Dole.
Bob Dole.
Bob Dole is going to be pinning that on Frank. And I'm as excited about that as I've been about anything in a long time. But we're going to wrap this up. I want to thank you. We just got through listening to Frank Couch. On behalf of the Rotary Club of Mocksville, myself, Kyle Swicegood, and Don Wooten, thank you for listening to another story from a World War II Davie County citizen. And as I've said at the end of each video, it's great to be an American.